www.outoflives.net.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Geek Out Weekly. I'm Ben, I'm here with Aadil.
Hey!
This episode, we're going to probably be calling you all dude and dudettes throughout most of it. We're going to be talking about the new Bill and Ted film, Face the Music.
That's Bill and Ted Face the Music.
Bill and Ted Face the Music. Bill ampersand Ted Face the Music. Colons,
Bill
and hyphens in there. Who knows what
Actually, no, the weird thing is there's no colon. It's just Bill ampersand Ted Face the Music.
Yes.
They bucked the trend of Bill and Ted colon, I believe.
Cool, good. Little point of reference there. Before we get into talking about this film, we thought we'd just have a little discussion about our thoughts, our memories, and how we feel about the previous films, or even previous films, and the cartoon. Ooh, maybe. Aadil, I'm going to throw to you first. I know. I'm going to throw to you.
I forgot
first.
all about the cartoon. Also, the trend wasn't colon; it was Bill and Ted, Ted's. Right? It was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, but it's Bill and Ted Face the Music. I watched these movies a lot growing up. One more than two, but they all kind of blur together, and I don't know if that's just because later on in life, I rewatched one more than two. But I think growing up, I grew up with two older sisters, and all of us loved the Bill and Ted movies. It was a common thing. We just watched the crap out of these things, to the point where I mean, for those of you who don't know, I'm a philosopher by trade, and I have a hard time not reading in my head Socrates to this day because of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And you know, when you're teaching or students and you're trying to explain an actual point, and your brain is like, "Don't say Socrates, don't say Socrates, don't say Socrates," because even if you mess up, they probably don't have this touch point.
Yeah.
Unless their parents, shared it with them, and their parents, like, so people in university in the past few years, who are the ones I've taught, are probably in the one spot where they might not be exposed to it, because I know people who like are close to our age who have shown their kids Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but like most people who are now around 20, their parents might not have been fans. Maybe I'm misjudging, but like there's definitely a time where it is an intergenerational movie, but in order for it to be passed down, you had to be a fan at the time, which means you had to be young enough to like appreciate the nonsense for what it is. But yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and I think they've realised that, maybe to not to move on too quickly, but they've realised that with the new film. I think with the inclusion of certain characters, they've realised that there is a bit of a generational kind of element there. You know, Bill and Ted are a lot older than, say, we are. So their kids, you know, they could be a bit older than they appear in the film, perhaps. But we'll get onto that. In a little bit. So
just to, if people don't want to do their own Googling, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was 1989. The TV show, which was a cartoon, which was 13 episodes, was 1990, and Bogus Journey was 1991. So like they hit that that train running. Like they knew, as soon as there was an success, they're like, let's make a cartoon and a sequel. Go, because it was the end of the 80s where you could make cartoons out of anything.
And I think the cartoon is actually where I came into Bill and Ted, like my first exposure to it. I think in '89 I was like 5, so I wasn't kind of the demographic of person watching that film at that time, but I definitely came into the cartoon a little bit more, and then watched the films maybe when I was a little bit older than that as well. But again, like you, I definitely watched one more than two, and I think again that my memories of both films are so intertwined with each other that it's hard to pick out and remember what happened where. And for going and watching the new film, I haven't been and rewatched them. I didn't go and see any sort of like highlights or anything like that. I just, and as we kind of discussed, just went into it trying to have, you know, the memory that I have of Bill and Ted now to then appreciate and watch this film with.
Yeah, I mean, I thought when it first came out, I'm like, oh, this is a good excuse to watch 1 and 2. And then when we just sort of talked about things we wanted to see that were more recent, I was like, actually, I remember enough of this. I kind of want to see just, like, not standalone, obviously. It's kind of like, let's revel in the nostalgia goggles that this movie is trying to play into,
Yes,
obviously, just from the
absolutely,
trailer
yeah.
and stuff, and not worry about whether, like, things that are from that time, especially, often a lot of jokes age really poorly, and you're like, I don't want to feel any sort of nostalgia feel bads before this. Let's just, like, I remember enough of this. You know, I remember, like, the vague plot of 1 and 2 are in my head, and like very specific scenes and like lines pop out to me and the vibe. So let's just go into that, and that's sort of what I did for this one as well.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly the same for me. Have you got anything you want to just bring up on the history of Bill and Ted or the films or anything before we launch into discussing the new film Face the Music?
Just that this was clearly, like, this was very much the producer and writer wanting to find a way to do this, and a lot of fans continuously outpouring support.
Yeah.
It's one of the few more grassroots type sequels we see nowadays. Budget I don't think was very big, but that's great because actually we'll get into like the CGI and stuff, but like they spent the money in the right spots, and the rest,
Yes.
it made it. I think the fact that it's riffing on a 1980s, 1990s film that was also low budget films makes the, like, when they use cheaper graphics or cheaper effects, it's just fine. I think it's really, like, because it sort of feels like the old movies in a certain sense.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really, really interesting. You can forgive it because it's living in the past in multiple ways. But yeah, that's about it. Let's trundle forward.
Perfect. So, for those of you who haven't seen the film or don't know much about it, the film kind of revolves around and starts off with Bill and Ted still trying to search for a song, like the song that's going to unite humanity. And
which was the basic plot of the first two, is getting them to play the song or getting them on track so that they don't ruin history. And there's a time traveling phone booth, but it's not Doctor Who.
Well, that was a police
phone box.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is very much an American phone box.
Yeah.
Well, I say American, North American. Is it the same in Canada? Are they completely different?
Most places in Canada didn't have closing phone booths.
Oh,
like with a sliding door.
Interesting.
But I mean, roughly the same idea.
Yeah, cool. So Bill and Ted are much older. I suppose, what are we now? We're 30 years on. So you'd put them in their late 40s as characters, maybe early 50s. I can't remember how old they are in the original films. They've got to be about 20, I guess.
No, so the first film is literally them needing to pass their last course in high school, an English paper.
In school, yes.
They're in high school, and it's like a history paper, and they end up going across time, bringing like Beethoven and Napoleon and Socrates for this amazing presentation to the school of the final paper, because that happens. Because of course they can't fail high schools, because if they do, Ted will get sent to military school by his police chief at that point, maybe not chief, but his cop father, and then the band will break. Wild Stallions won't write the amazing song that unites humanity.
Yes. So how old are you then? 18 when you finish high school in the States?
Yeah, depending on when your birthday is, but yeah, so like I was 17, but my birthday's in October, and I started sort of, instead of starting late, I started early.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So
but yeah, half of my cohort were 18 when we graduated.
And so they're in their late 40s, roughly.
Yeah.
And you kind of see them, and they're portrayed as, you know, having this sort of fall from grace, that things didn't go swimmingly following the last two films. You know, they hit a level of fame, and it's all kind of been downhill from there. You're introduced to their families and their daughters, also very confusingly called Bill and Ted.
But inversely.
Yes, they've decided to name their daughter after their best friend, each of them. So
technically, it's Billy and Theodora.
Yes,
but
yeah.
Bill and Ted.
And then awkwardly, as we just had a discussion about, noted as Thea in the credits, and you said maybe they refer to each other and call Thea.
Right.
Ted.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes. Slightly awkward, as I say, but Bill and Ted are kind of brought back to the future and told that they really got to find this song, because otherwise all of reality is going to stop and implode.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting, because what they did was raise the stakes from make sure that humanity will continue to be a utopia, which was the last two films, to all of reality. But I think because of the nature of like action movies and superhero films, especially, of like always ramping to the end of existence, that was really smart. Normally I think it's dumb to do that, but it's done so because it's such a silly, fun movie. I think it makes this like, here are the standard stakes. All of reality will collapse, which is way bigger than the last one. But they like play into it, because then they say like the nexus point of reality's collapse is reality, right? Is Bill and Ted is this 7:17 p.m. on this one day. I can't remember what day, but
exactly in San Dimas.
Yeah, and you're like, well, that's dumb. Because humanity isn't. Oh, right. This movie isn't like. It's very clear that they're raising the stakes and know it's dumb, and so they're not going to write around it or try and make it seem reasonable. They're just like, yep. For some reason, reality's breaking, and people are starting to pop in and out of time in different spots. Because this song it needs to be played, and they haven't figured it out yet. Which has also always been the hilarious thing about Bill and Ted, because it has this notion of like concurrent time with time travel, which is one of the big pieces of the movie, right? Is that they have a watch that tells them what the actual time is in San Dimas, as if they couldn't. See, it's like, well, we took you at 5 p.m. and so you have 2 hours until 7:17, even though you're traveling through time, because that time is still moving forward. And you're like, what?
Yep, this is my kind of my biggest, not issue, but my biggest kind of mind-bending problem with it. It's the whole kind of just time travel in general. It's like, if you don't do this by this point, everything in the future is not going to exist. Reality kind of won't exist, but they're still able to travel into the future to go and look for, and this is part of it, they go to look for the song, because they think, let's just go and get the song from our future selves, we must have done it. But there's like this one timeline where it's continuously running, but if they go into the future, it's not a future of that timeline, because if reality has stopped, then that future wouldn't exist, but they must be going into a parallel future. And my mind is sort of like,
yeah, I mean, so
sure.
I mean, a bit of a spoiler. They I think they just used throwaway lines of quantum physics to just
very much.
Which again, we'll talk about who is the main theorizer of that later, because I think it's worth talking about. But again, I think it's like, hey, movies are so bad. It feels like they are living the trope and knowing it, because it's like movies just say someone say technobabble and it's fine. Or we won't address it, and we'll just keep moving on. And I think it works because this is a very fun, rompy comedy. It's very dumb, and it bothered me for a half second before the pedant in me just died as I was enjoying the rest of the film.
Absolutely. And it again, for me, it wasn't constantly like, But how have they gone into how every time they jump into that slightly further future and see their future selves, but they wouldn't be there. It didn't really kind of occur to me apart from that initial sort of thought.
Yeah.
And just be like, right, I'm not going to worry about it. They're not worrying about it. I'm not going to worry about it. It's fine.
The one thing I will add, which is, I did look it up while we were chatting. It's Theodora Thea Preston and Wilhelmina Billy Logan.
Oh.
So Billy and Thea are actually their nicknames for Theodora and Wilhelmina, which Wilhelmina is a really good reference to the fact that the moms are princesses from medieval Europe. Yeah. Anyway, I think we're gonna have a lot of these weird, twisty, roundabout moments. But so they have been banging their head against the song and are basically jokes from huge fame, and they can't figure it out, and their marriage is breaking apart. They go to a therapist, which is a very fun scene.
Yes.
Which ends with them, but which loops back when they go 2 years in the future to steal the song from themselves, to find out that they're divorced, and they go back to couples counseling, and that's when the future wives, future princesses, from way in the future, are taking the princesses on a trip through time to show them all the ways the relationship doesn't work.
Yep.
So maybe they should just get divorced. But I think this is the point where I think the themes of the original movie come back really well, because the original movie is they want to be rock stars, but they never learned to play.
Yeah.
And the second movie is kind of about winning a Battle of the Bands contest, but they don't know how to play. Their wives know how to play instruments. They do not. And the way Bogus Journey ends is they disappear and they come bearing the two kids who are just babies in like baby backpacks. And they've got huge beards, and it turns out they just did intensive training and then came back in time. So they beat the bad robots. Spoilers for Bogus Journey. There's a guy from the future who makes bad robot versions of them to ruin their lives, because he hates the way things are and thinks if he kills Bill and Ted or breaks up the Wild Stallions, then it'll all be okay. The future won't be this crappy place he doesn't like. So they just Deus Ex Machina via time travel, which is great, right? This is perfect.
Yeah.
So they come back and they just know how to play. Like, they never do the hard training, and the beginning bit of the movie is showing their, like, through like a montage of like how they clearly know how to play, and they're really successful.
Yes.
And then they're not, and then it cuts to Missy's wedding, her 5th wedding or whatever, because she's married both their dads at one point. Just now we're marrying Ted's brother, and which is great, because they had her float around between 1 and 2, and so to like lean into that by having her marry her ex-son-in-law. Yeah. But then they have Bill and Ted try and perform a song, and it's got like really, it's them doing really hard things. Like, it's not a good sound. It's an okay sounding song. I actually kind of like it. Yeah.
And doing very guttural
throat singing.
vocal throat singing. Yes.
Yeah, but like cyclical throat singing and the theremin are two of the hardest things to learn. And they've learned it. So like they've done all the work, but they don't have the creativity.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, so the wall they have at the beginning of the movie is trying really hard but not succeeding, versus the other movies where it's like trying to take the easy way out, which is we just want to be famous, we don't want to do the hard work. But then as soon as they're confronted with realities coming apart, they default to old Bill and Ted.
Yes.
So it's really neat because it introduces them as they've matured and grown up. They're trying their hardest. They're doing the work. But then but because the plot is still a Bill and Ted movie, it has them immediately go back to, let's cheat. Let's just go and get the song from another point in time when it's already written.
Yep. Even though they had that revelation in the second film, and they went and put the work in and spent time, and then just came back in time to the point where they needed to. Without that kind of thought in their mind, as you say, they defaulted back to their younger days, being like, oh, let's just steal it off of our future selves, because obviously we've written it at some point, so it must exist somewhere.
It's Yeah, I thought that was really smart. So basically, we now have the wives, which we rarely see until the end. Basically, going through time, we just see them basically appearing on the stops of Bill and Ted,
Yep.
the older Bill and Ted, to showing on their tour of how they're bad people, bad partners throughout time. But when sorry, we sort of jumped a bit. So they come home from therapy. They realize things are bad, and that's when Kristen Shaw, who is Rufus's daughter, comes back in time. Rufus being the guy who guided them, famously played by George Carlin.
Yep.
She comes back to say they want to talk to you. That's when they go to the future and find out, oh, you need to play the song at 7:17, and they get the magic watch that tells them that time is progressing in a weird way. But when they come back, so then they run off and they steal the old phone booth, and Kirsten Shaw and Kirsten Shaw's mom. There's a new theory that the way to save the future in reality is to kill Bill and Ted, and they send a time traveling robot, who is very great. In the past, and Kristen Shaw goes to the past to when she first found Bill and Ted, because she thinks that's got to be where the robot will look for them, because that's like last known spot in time that they were at, and that's when Bill and Ted Jr. Are like, we just want to help our dads write this song that they've been trying. Let's find a band to help them perform it, and so they basically take Kristen Shaw's egg time machine and start going. And that's the two parallel paths of really the plot are Bill and Ted seeing themselves get older and hating their older selves, trying to cheat at writing this song, and then Bill and Ted Jr. wide-eyed being like, our dads need help with this song, we'll get them the perfect band.
Yeah, and doing what their dads did in the first film and going back through time and picking up historic figures, essentially, to bring them back to help.
But instead it's historical. So like they're introduced as basically having Bill and Ted as their dads. They just love music and they're encyclopedic and they listen to everything. Like they're like, when their dads come home, they're like listening to music in the garage and they're gushing over their dad's crazy song at the wedding, making very big references to, like, I'm assuming these are accurate, but like world-class theremin player, throat singer, like, man, I could tell that like the theremin was influenced by blah blah blah, and like, oh, blah 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 was really an influence, and you could see that this is something they all share, but also it immediately introduces their musical bona fides, which I really enjoyed how quick it was.
Yeah, definitely. By
being obscure instruments, and then, oh, I know exactly how you were influenced by those. Very smart writing there. But anyway, so they clearly know their music, and they start going back in time. And yeah, so those are the three time traveling plot lines, but basically the two, right? So it's Bill and Ted dealing with their increasingly older selves who are not nice people that they dislike, who they're basically, it's showing them that if they continue the way they are, they not only will be alone because their wives will leave them, but they'll also become people they clearly don't like, which I think is more important. Like the trope, like the writing is, they will still be alone, and they're very much like, how do we get our wives back? But I think really what the writing is showing is, these are people I don't want to be, and that's kind of the and so I think it's really, again, good writing, because like the vibe of the audience is, boy, they suck and they don't like who these people are, but we're actually in a different epistemic place than the characters, who are just so concerned with losing their wives, which you would be, right? If you were like,
absolutely, yeah.
You know, your wife's worried about you worried about bringing up counseling, and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm going to be alone, and then you see how terrible you are. You're like, I'm not getting them back, and you're preoccupied with that. But subconsciously, you're also like, I don't want to be the person I am apparently becoming.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the three different sort of time travel elements, I think that the wives going through time is a little bit throwaway and is much more used as a plot device to get Bill and Ted stuck at a certain point to then move into kind of like the final third of the movie. And it felt just a bit kind of not tacked on, because I can understand why they would want to do that and sort of say, actually, there are, our wives aren't just leaving us, there is this thing going on as well, which makes it even more pressing in our minds that this thing is going to happen which will lead to that, so we need to do something about that. So it gives them motivation, but it also is just a bit of a mechanic to get them stuck at one point as well. And it doesn't get explored massively. It doesn't take up much time. They appear every now and again in the future, and see certain points, see future Bill and Ted when they're absolutely monsters of humans, when they're in prison, and seeing sort of certain points. Again, there's you were saying about how, you know, it's a really fun and very comedic sort of film. There are definitely things in this which I don't like.
That's fair.
And that is one of them. First, that they're just kind of a little bit. The wives are just a bit throwaway. I don't know what they could have done additionally to kind of bring them in a bit more, but I wanted something else from them.
So I agree. I think, and that's one of the complaints one would have with the older films, is that the princesses in the beginning, in the first movie, were just sidelined.
Yeah,
like they were. I mean, they were sidelined kind of. But that was okay in the sense because they were just one of the stops.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't. I think they came on the journey for a bit, but didn't really say much. And then in Bogus Journey, they were again a foil of the bad robot versions are going to break us up. But then they just showed up at the end and helped play. And like the best scene, I think, from what I recall, don't at me, is the fact that in between films they learned music or had learned music as princesses, and so they were skilled where their boyfriends weren't.
Yep.
And then they weren't really a big part of Bogus Journey because they weren't on the journey, but they again felt sidelined. It's like, okay, so you've done that again. All you've done is said the kids are important now, and the kids happen to be female, but you're still kind of doing that. Once you're a partner, you're just there for the male protagonist.
Yep.
Like it doesn't actually fix it by saying the kids have their own path. And like the other thing I would say is everyone is. I mean, it's hard because it's Bill and Ted, and they're supposed to be pivotal, right? But like their kids don't quite seem to know they're supposed to ride the world. Like they know some stuff, right? But like their kids are still working for them. Like every part of the movie is in service of them. And I do like the reveal at the end. Which are we okay starting to talk about now?
I think so. Yeah, we're halfway into the show. That's not a problem. If people don't want to know,
so basically, the reveal, which you should be able to see miles away anyway, like within 20 minutes, is that the Preston and Logan who perform this universe, like unity across time now, which wasn't mentioned in the first two movies, but now it's like they will unite humanity across time. The Preston and Logan are Billy and Thea, not Bill and Ted.
Yep.
Which is great, right? It all. I think the script just doesn't quite earn what it's doing in the way we were just talking about, how Bill and Ted are the center, and like the wives realize that, and maybe this is wise because like they see Bill and Ted just in shittier lives without them, but we don't get to see the stops where. Like they say, we at the very end. Sorry, I'm doing two paths, but we'll stick on the wives thing, then I'll jump back. They say at the end, we realize the best timeline is this one, where we're with you right now, which doesn't really make sense except they see that Bill and like we only ever see the stops where they intersect with Bill and Ted, and Bill and Ted's lives are worse. We don't see what their lives would be without Bill and Ted, and maybe I wouldn't be surprised if a couple scenes were on the cutting room floor. To keep it around 90 minutes. But what it comes off as is we wouldn't want you guys to turn into drunkards and prison ex-cons, etc. or something. So we'll stay here. And it really makes it feel like they are just sort of being martyrs for Bill and Ted. Not that this is something that's great for their personal happiness. And I think it feels unearned because of that. And in the same way, like, because of that sidelining, because everything is Bill and Ted centric, which part of it, I think the writers are trying to like that switch, if it's actually the kids, is like supposed to be, oh right, it's not, life isn't just around these two dudes, even though we all think it is. But it doesn't do enough to earn more than, I guess we were wrong, when I feel like the script is trying to say that it's trying to do this handoff to the young generation can maybe save the world. Like, that's clearly what they're doing. And also the saviors of the world can be young females. That's what they're trying to do, right? But it's not, it just it feels like not enough is done in the plot of the film to earn that as not tokenism, I guess, is the one place.
And another point, something that I very much wrote down was that the historic musical figures that they go through time to get, Jimi Hendrix, Louis Armstrong,
Mozart,
but then just two historical female musicians that maybe
big.
It's Ling Lun, who I've never heard of, and then just a cave woman who drums, who may be a historic figure, but I've got no idea. I've heard of the blokes. I don't know these
I mean, part of
ones.
that is this, the thing they're again trying to push against, right? Is like most of us think of huge historical musical figures from a Eurocentric historical point of view. So they do this throwaway line where they say, like, Mozart says she's the best flautist or whatever, and they didn't know she was female.
Yes, yeah.
Which I thought was cool, right? But then she obviously, I mean, I get it. It's hard to write because they barely get, Mozart gets a fair few lines in German, given that, but then she gets like one line in Chinese.
Yep.
And then so this is where I don't like, so like, okay, Mozart knows history. I don't know enough about, I didn't remember what date it was, but it's like, sure, he might know this is an amazing flute composer or Chinese composer or whatever. Because surely he wouldn't know about like proficiency on the instrument because there's no recordings, right? But like, yes, so he knows this is a famous flautist, but then she says, then they do another throw line where like she says that this is the best drummer ever, but it's 14,000 BC. You're like, okay, now you're taking the piss, and you're just doing this African drumming savagery thing, which I get, like, part of it, like, African drumming has a very quote unquote tribal thing, and like, yes, it's probably the earliest point in music, arguably comes from there, and I get it, but it just, again, it came across because the ties were so like loose. Again, it's just like, oh yeah, he knows about this flautist and she knows about something she couldn't possibly know about. It just comes across as, well, we need to write in more tokens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wondered whether there were more female musicians, I suppose, as well known as, say, Hendrix or Louis Armstrong, but a lot of them are singers, which this isn't centered around. So you couldn't have like
Etta James,
Billie Holiday or Etta James. You couldn't have people like that. Because it doesn't focus on the on that side of things. It has to be someone who plays an instrument, and I'm sure there are people out there who can throw me a lot of very proficient female players.
I mean, it's tough because history has been patriarchal, right?
Absolutely, and it's being able to have your audience recognise. Hendrix, hugely recognisable. Louis Armstrong, again, massive. You could have then picked whoever you wanted, really, after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, another element, I think, of a little bit of tokenism in that, by just throwing in those other couple of characters kind of towards it.
I think if they gave them more agency than tag-alongs, and I get it that the language barrier is hard to write around, but it that would have made it feel less like tokenism and more like effort, I guess, is the thing. Right? Like, if you if you made something happen of significance to the plot by these two people, not that they're just doing flute. And I mean, the best to be honest, like the drumming being central to the beginning of the song and throughout, and a lot of cutaways to the drummer was the most any of those, except for like a couple of solos, right? Like was the most that in the song a musician really mattered. Death was prominent, and like the percussion was prominent, right? But yeah, again, outside of that, they could have been anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's sort of soured me. But But anyway, so yeah, I agree. That's probably the like token, not quite real feminism feels weren't great. And it sucks because they clearly, I think they were trying. I just don't think that they had taken their blinders off fully or really recognized how much sidelining. Like, even the fact that like the older female, the older women, the princesses, that's their name, never got a line. They were just like in makeup, waving from afar. Made their whole journey seem stupid, right? It seems like we don't really care. We're not even zooming. We're not even cutting to a real, like, there's the one explanation. Like, they're like, the princesses look outside of the window and the therapists, and they see the wave. They're like, oh, that's older us. We gotta go. And then you just see them jump in and go. And like, except for like one or two scenes where it's like when Bill and Ted are in the same spot, that the two booths are beside each other, that we have any sort of close up, and you're like, if you can do Bill and Ted with their old people having a real conversation, like, again, it might be cutting room floor stuff, but that's not great for the editing then, because it really just cut that entire path.
Yes. So we'll move on to kind of, I suppose, the final part of the movie, and we get sort of in the middle where younger Bill and Ted, or female Bill and Ted, the daughters, are traveling through time, and they have to go to see Jimi Hendrix, and he doesn't want to come with them, so they go to Louis Armstrong. He's amazed that they've got this phone and that they've taken a recording of Hendrix, so he's like, yeah, I'll come and see this guy, and they go back to Hendrix, who then agrees, and their sort of journey progresses through that. But we get to a point
and that's like the most classic Bill and Ted thing.
Yes, but it feels a little bit sort of short-lived because there's all of this other stuff going on, and they arrive kind of back ready to start recording, and then pretty swiftly get killed and sent to hell by this absolutely ridiculous robot who constantly makes errors all of the time.
Yeah, so I think let's go back, because the first time the robot goes back in time, it's when Bill and Ted first go 2 years back, and they see sort of divorced Bill and Ted playing. Sorry, forward. Yeah,
yes.
Right. Sorry. Time. Yeah. So they go to 2022, and they meet jerk Bill and Ted, who are freshly divorced and drinking and playing in bars. And then they go 5 years ahead, and they meet Bill and Ted with faux English accents, who are pretending to be successful and giving them a copy of a Dave Grohl song, because they're just stealing Dave Grohl's house and want Bill and Ted to basically play a Dave Grohl single and just get famous. Not unite the world, but at least life will be better. And that's when the robot comes and attacks them and accidentally kills Ted's dad, who's currently chief of police and running a SWAT team to finally arrest them, because they're just that deadbeats, because they've broken into Dave Grohl's house. Yeah. And it's a lovely scene, because like Deacon, the brother, is like, you can't shoot Ted, Dad. And he's like, you've gone too far. Which is very much like Ted's dad, is always a little like over the top. You're deadbeats, you're useless, you're losers. But then Ted's dad and the SWAT van behind him get shot, because the robot comes and is aiming at the phone booth, and he shoots. The phone booth disappears, and then the robot kills Ted's dad and destroys the van, just disintegrates it. And then it's the first time. So you only ever see the robot as just like Terminator style, and then the robot just shifty eyes. And you're like, oh, so good. And then you see, so then Bill and Ted, young Bill and Ted, Billy and Thea, come back in time with all these musicians, and they open the garage so everyone can start learning the modern instruments, and then they just all get vaporized by the robot, who then goes, oh, or something like that. And it's just like, oh no, and they're like, oh, everyone died and went to hell. And then
I think they did I think they did a good point to turn the robot from this, and it never appeared to be this, supervillain that was very threatening really at any point, and for them to kind of take it and be like, well, it's kind of this throwaway thing chasing them through time, it doesn't seem to do anything, and then giving it this sort of comedy twist, I thought was very good. and the way that it actually then plays out further with the robot. You know, giving them his name when he realizes it, and really realizing that he's kind of got emotions and or some
And
kind
agency.
of sense of emotions.
Yeah.
Does work very well, and it is they are kind of the more like laugh out loud moments of the film, I think, as well. It's that unexpected element where you're just like, so it kind of does work. It does seem a little bit sort of cheesy. I think the first time I'm like, I can kind of see where this might go, but then it was
So I think the best moments with the robot were the first couple times where he's like struggling, and you're like, how far are they going to take this? And then they lean into it, which I think is probably the right thing from a writing standpoint, because you can't hold that like level of tension. You have to let the dam break. The next time we see him is after they go visit their ancient selves, who give them a USB key, Preston Logan M46, 7:17 p.m., which is the nexus point. They're like, cool, we have the song. And then the robot comes and says, and so that's when the old versions of the princesses steal the phone booth so that they can show the younger, well, the middle-aged princesses, all the, you know, they take them on the supposed tour of you know, terrible lives. And the robot comes and says, I have to kill you. And they're like, you know, we have to, like, we've got the song, you don't have to kill me. And like, oh, okay. And then they realize that, and then he's like, oh, I'm really sorry. And he gets super timid, like, now that you have the song, mistakes were made, and
I killed your family.
Kind of killed your kids. And they're like, kill us. We need to go to hell because we've been there before to save our kids. And he's like, oh, I can't do that. You have the song. So then they break the USB key, and he's like, actually, I really don't think I can kill people anymore. Which is kind of great.
So he then goes to kill himself.
He goes to kill himself, and they jump on him, and they die. But we do see the princesses see them kill themselves.
Yes.
Right before. So they jump to hell, and now they're tracking through hell, which is very good, low budget, like just corridors that have styrofoam that's painted brown.
And
most of it,
the two demons as well, like very good, like super deadpan, like there's a robot in hell.
Huh.
It was just
That's
very
weird. Yeah. And that's when we learn. So then the robot appears because he's killed himself as well. The robot appears and he tells them his name is Caleb McCoy. Oh,
Dennis
McCoy. Oh wait, Dennis Caleb McCoy. And we find out that the mom named the robot after Kirsten Shaw, her daughter's ex-boyfriend. And it's just that's one of my favorite throwaway lines in the movie, because it's so unneeded and so hilarious. And then he becomes this weird, self-effacing, unsure, but wants to be part of the gang loser bot that they like humor because they're nice guys. But then every time he starts to like ramble, they're like, yeah, we're done, cool. And like that's where he gets a little grating, but he's supposed to be. But I think writing wise, I get it.
Yes, yeah.
And that so now they have to go visit Death. And turns out Death was part of the band for a long time. And then they had a falling out because fame went to his head. And so they have, and it's played by William Stadler. What's his name? Sadler, right? Stadler is the guy from Muppet, Stadler and Waldorf. William Sadler played who's reprising his role, which is fine because he was in a lot of makeup and balded there before. And they get no headway, and that's when Billy and Thea like use their musical knowledge to like swoon over Death's albums to get him to join the band. Which I thought was really cool because again it's reminding us they have musical bona fides and that they really love music, right? Because they've actually listened to these terrible albums of Death's that they must have known him as kids, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
But also at this point, I think one thing we've missed I wanted to touch on was what did you think of Billy and Thea? We have sort of like not really talked about them as characters, and I think it's a good point to sort of jump back to them.
Yeah, I liked them, but I felt that it was like they were super overplayed, and they were just a little bit too trying to capture that that naivety and sort of almost not dumbness of young Bill and Ted from the original films, but it was almost trying to mirror them then, rather than them being their own kind of characters. I think they were trying a bit too hard to get you to feel that way about them. Like, oh, it's just them. It's exactly them as their daughters are exactly them. And I think they would have been a little bit better served to be like, no, they're a little bit different. And I think especially Thea, it was just like and it's just kind of just grate a little bit. I think it could have just been a little bit better in terms of kind of the way that, not the way that the characters played. It was played how, you know, the direction was kind of provided in the way that it was written. But I think just more that it could have been written a little bit better in how they were presented and how they came across. Yeah,
so I felt kind of the opposite in the first few scenes. I'm like, especially with Billy. Billy does a like the like slight tongue curl or lip curls. The like the affectation is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
And I thought it was smart that they didn't make them say "whoa" and "excellent" a bunch, but like Billy is doing a Bill and Ted impression and doing a good one, and Thea, the blonde one, just in case we're getting confused, isn't doing as well as one. But then I feel like, again, because of that, they made her much more silent. So most of the scenes with Bill and Ted are Billy. And I think it's because Billy's doing a more interesting impression. But that's where, like, after a few scenes, I'm kind of like, okay, I like the idea of you doing this, and I have noticed that you're not just doing like an impersonation, but I agree, they lean really hard into it, and it sucks because at times I think it works against the personas that are being developed.
Yes,
like they're too busy being like dude rhetoric, if not dude the word, right? That they aren't able to like just, I want them to be gushing over Mozart more or something, right? Or just doing something that's clearly, we were raised with music and the idea that music could save the world. And yeah, we were raised by these Valley Boys from the 80s and 90s, so we kind of talk like them. But we're not just them, right? We're like our own people.
Yeah.
You know? And it's just not again, I thought I really liked it for most of the film, and then by the end, I think it's because those other bits of agency, etc., were also sort of had popped in mind. And I'm like, actually, the impersonation, affectation stuff, too strong. Liked it for the most part, and again, I think I really liked Billy as an actress and like doing that role. I thought it was really well done. Even beyond that, but then I realized, oh right, the reason why I'm like, she's so good, and I'm not saying that about Thea, is because she got all the lines like Thea really didn't get very many lines, and I'm surprised. I would be surprised if they wrote it that way. But it's definitely how they edited it, and it kind of sucks because then Thea becomes a lot of like reactions.
Yes, absolutely, yeah,
and not like you said, not a lot of content, and I think it sucks because Samara Weaving didn't seem to be doing an impression of Bill or Ted necessarily, but I can't tell because there's so few lines of substance.
Yeah. Kind of, again, it's that element that they're utilized to tell you that this is Bill and Ted's kind of story, even though in the conclusion it's the girls who are the ones who you know come up with the song and kind of edit everyone together, getting them to do their sort of bits, but it was still kind of, it's still pushing you to think of Bill and Ted rather than the girls as such.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main problem is like it goes from you wrote this song that united the world to they had a good improv set. Like they knew how to stitch things together, which is hard, right? But it doesn't have the same gravitas, I think. And also, this I think is a really big tension. Ultimately, I think it's the right way they had to do it, which is the reason why it stitched humanity together was because Bill and Ted basically use quantum mechanics to be in not quite infinite, because that's not how that works, guys. That's still the finite number of places and times where people need instruments. They give instruments to everyone throughout time, who can now, because of the collapse of everything, of reality, can hear the music being played at MP46, and so Bill and Ted instead leave the stage to go give instruments with them and their wives go give instruments to everyone.
Mm-hmm. And all they really needed was the key and the tempo, essentially.
Yeah. Which, fine. You know what? Fine. Deus ex musica. But, like, again, it's a good way of highlighting that they weren't needed. Mm. They were pragmatically needed, but not needed on the stage, even though at the end of the song they come and do their solos. Yes. But, like, the key here, I think, that I was trying to get to, not the time signature, was that it wasn't such a magnificent song, because that's like the part that's always the most skeptical part of you with Bill and Ted's is like, there's just magic song. Like, I love music, but come on. But the fact that time was breaking apart and everyone could experience this shared moment, which I like, because that's kind of why hearing music live versus listening to in a crowd versus listening to an album is a fundamentally different and more transformative experience. And that's kind of, I feel like, what they were doing. It's like, and I think that's why the nexus of reality and time falling apart was actually a smart move, given that the way they're explaining the magic song is that it was a magic shared experience, and that everyone was involved and not just passive.
Yeah.
Really cool idea. But again, it sort of makes whoever happened, it puts all the work on everyone else, which is smart, but then it also makes Bill and Ted Juniors less important. But I think that's a fine-ish trade-off. But again, with all the other weird stuff, it's like just that moment of, oh, it's you guys. Yes. We're going to be back up for you.
Like that
it's kind of
the torch almost, which then isn't really.
Yeah, I feel like that tension.
Yeah.
Like I like why they did the way things. Like, I like the end move, but then all the build up to the torch passing doesn't work in light of the ending, and that's what kind of was less good.
Yes. I think we should start to think about our kind of final thoughts on the film. We've rolled through the story. I know, Aadil, you wanted to talk about the soundtrack a little bit, so maybe we can stop in there before we finish up.
Yeah. One last thing, character-wise. Kid Cudi, because we said we would talk about it at the beginning. So before we go to almost final thoughts, Kid Cudi, hilarious. They have him unstuck in time, and he appears right at the right moment to join the crew to then die. So that and he just, again, a really nice tropey thing. They make him just know a lot about quantum physics, but also, again, they have this throwaway discussion where Billy and Thea are chatting with Kid Cudi, and they all seem to understand quantum theory.
Yep.
Because he's like, I think it's this thing, and there's like, oh, you sure it's not this thing? He's like, yeah, I think it's this thing. I'm like, you really understand the quantum theory of our circumstance or whatever, and you're like, cool. That's some interesting things. So they're not dumb high school almost dropouts. Like they're dads, unexplored.
Yeah, completely.
And they have him so then he's the one who explains to Bill and Ted that sort of I mean, spoiler alert, if you know even a little bit about these things, he doesn't explain anything on how they can be infinite and hand out all these instruments from who knows when. And really fun, and I like the idea of putting modern music, but he doesn't get to, because it's just sort of like a improvisational riffing thing, and he's primarily known for his vocal stuff, and he can't be the singer of the big song. Yes. He kind of just sing along, and everyone says ooh, ooh, ah, ah. And I was like, well, that's kind of a waste of Kid Cudi. Maybe he could help them mix, but of course they have to be mixing. I liked it. I thought it was great to have someone kind of 2020 relevant.
Absolutely. And I think, again, underutilized. They could have had a hook. They could have had something, just rather than just a noise. They could have had just a line, something.
To be honest, because the vocalist, if they had him join the gang a little sooner, then maybe him beatboxing or doing something melodically out loud because they don't have instruments with them when they're traveling, really, or one of the non-English speaking to convince one of the non-English speaking people, like, oh, I know music, we speak the musical language, would have been kind of cool.
Yeah.
But what I realized in this discussion, which is one of the reasons I wanted to go back to it, is you know what would be actually less faux feminist tokenism if they got a modern female artist in that spot who was playing the unexpectedly super smart science person.
Yeah.
Because he's not super smart at science as far as I know. That's a joke. But giving a female artist of similar renown, and I'm sure it's hard because, again, like you have to get a famous person to agree, but like,
Yes.
and I don't know if they tried other people, but that was a much larger role. And it was also an plot enabling role because they constantly, both timelines pivoted on the advice of this person.
And it's
so even though it's a smaller role, it feels more or less
absolutely
token, right?
And it would have, you want that unexpected. One of the not to deviate too far out of this, but one of the scenes that I always remember from Wayne's World is Alice Cooper giving them all of this information about the Native Americans that live in the area and why the state is called what it is and all this sort of stuff, and coming across, you're getting this unexpected line from him. And yeah, as you say, I think it's a great little role for someone to sort of to sit in. And I think had it have been someone, you could have got, like, maybe they couldn't have got, maybe they approached and you could have had Beyonce or Lady Gaga, or someone
Beyonce
like massive, or brought it down a little bit and found someone else to come and fill that role. You get Britney Spears in there, mate. Just come in and just throw all of this like knowledge down. I think yes, would have added a little bit.
Again, because it very much felt, and it's hard because like the supreme leader of the future is a woman, but she's also wrong. Which again, you don't want them always to. You can't have people in power who representing minorities always be right. That isn't what I'm saying. But I feel like she didn't. All of it together feels like, well, we gotta, like, again, felt a little too tokenistic just because of the amount of lines and like roles, etc. And like, again, I don't know if this movie passes the Bechdel test because it's all about Bill and Ted, right? That's weird for a movie that's saying that it's not these old middle-aged white dudes who actually have the impact. It's these young 20-year-old, 24-year-old women. That's weird, right? The fact that all their lines are primarily to male historical people about their dads needing to help their dads. But yeah, I mean, I know we're running low on time, so I just wanted to say I thought the best part of the soundtrack was how understated it was. Some really good old, like, classic tracks, etc. But they don't play a lot of like strong music that's like in the front of the scenes during the film, which means when they hit things like Jimi Hendrix or Louis Armstrong or Mozart playing like diegetically, you're like, oh right, because, and I think I started paying attention about halfway through just how much of the score was happening in a way that was not obvious, like, or like understated, and how much of a impact that made the actual musical scenes. And it's not like they were boring scored scenes. It's just like the sound direction was very much, I'm going to do the sound, but not make you super aware the sound is happening, scoring is happening. I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you have any?
I agree. I think, as you say, it made that much more impactful than when the musicians were playing. That we didn't have like constant songs over the top of stuff or in transitions and things that were like pushed forward. That it wasn't hitting like, 80s rock songs or even 90s. It wasn't hitting those moments which you think, right, it's a Bill and Ted film. Maybe there's going to be some kind of killer soundtrack to go on, and there might be a killer soundtrack. They might have licensed a load of songs to go on a soundtrack. They didn't appear kind of within the film or even prominent within that. So yeah, it makes that a bit more impactful when the musicians are doing what they're doing. It makes you really sit there and be like, yes, this is someone that they should be getting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other thing is just that they built Wild Stallions are like a hair metal type thing,
Hmm.
the earlier, right? And instead the soundtrack is much more modern, like the music director John Leahy involved like basically said the electric guitar moved past hair metal, so let's acknowledge the intervening 20 years,
Yeah.
30 years. And so it's Weezer, Mastodon, Lamb of God are like the actual bands that like
Hmm.
bigger names of bands that are on the soundtrack that are also in the like influences in the diegetic, the actual in on-screen electric guitar, with the exception of I can't remember and I couldn't find the article just now, but who they got to play the air guitar, but it's very much the hair metal air guitar, like classic staple of Bill and Ted's, right? When things are going their way, they both turn and they do air guitar, but to us, we actually hear someone noodling on a guitar, which
Yes.
is always great, right? Because that's what you hear in your head, and you're with Bill and Ted, and they're like, right? And like that part has not changed a bit. Like, they could have used the same cuts from the first movie. Who
Yeah.
knows? I'm sure
Yeah.
they didn't. But like, it's the exact same style of music. But then the rest of the, including like during the face of music or whatever they call the final number, um, it's much more aesthetically modern
Yes.
electric
Yeah.
guitar,
Very much
which I
so.
think again is a really smart thing because 20 years has passed,
Hmm.
and like we just don't do hair metal as much.
Well, some people don't. Come around my house
Yeah,
on a Friday night.
that's fair.
Yeah, so let's finish there. Let's just have a little kind of recap on just our general thought of the film. For me, it is a fun little romp. There's a few kind of laugh out loud moments. It does have some issues, and I think maybe this is much more geared towards us, towards people who enjoyed Bill and Ted back in the day. I'm not sure this is gonna, as a sort of a standalone film that many people are gonna be like, I'm gonna go and watch this film now that I've found it, knowing absolutely nothing about Bill and Ted whatsoever. How about you?
I think I am of the same opinion. I like this movie again. While watching it, the tokenism stuff kind of came up, but mostly it's real fun to watch, and
Yeah,
it really stood out just because they were. It very much felt like they were trying to make this point of handing off from middle-aged men to young 20 something. Also thought it was great that they were 24 and still living at home because that's millennials,
yeah,
right? Like we aren't in the position of like having our own houses, etc., for the most part, right? Like, and as an older millennial, like I thought that was really smart because that's the generation transfer that like makes the most sense. And I thought that was really smart, and I really liked it. And it's just like under a closer examination, those themes felt a little hollow just because of like all these choices we touched on. But I really liked it. I actually think the way we watched it might be ideal. If you were never a fan of Bill and Ted, I think you can't watch this without at least watching Excellent Journey, Bogus, or Excellent Adventure, Bogus Journey.
yes,
Wow. If you were, and you even remember things remotely, like their Valley LA boy vacantness and the way they spoke, etc., it's probably enough to watch this and enjoy it. It's very popcorn, feel good,
yeah,
just like easy to watch. I recommend it, but like it's not a giant feminist statement, and it's and the feminist statement slash transition. It doesn't even have to be feminist if you don't like the term, right? But I mean, don't get me started on that. But like the idea of actually maybe it isn't that generation of people, and it's the new generation we have to put our trust in, and they might be able to save things. That's a good message, regardless.
yeah,
As long as you are okay with that, not sort of like you said, having those directorial, editorial, suboptimal follow through. I think it's still a good message, and I think ultimately, like, it's something you can grab some popcorn and throw on with your family and just enjoy.
yeah, yeah.
Could it have been better? Yeah, but was it bad? No. Like at no point, even though we were being quite, I think it's because it's seeing the potential and not quite living up to it is why we were picking on those things. But
Yes.
it's not like the moms were really sidelined, but like, and yeah, it probably doesn't pass the Bechdel test, but it's trying to at least pivot in the right direction, and it's fun. So I'd say recommend.
Yeah, I would as well. With those slight caveats, it is one just to throw on a Friday night when you've got nothing else to do, and relive a little bit of your youth if you are fans of Bill and Ted through that. So that's Bill and Ted Face the Music. What are we doing for the rest of the week? We've got some streams here on our Out of Lives Twitch channel, which you'll probably see again on our YouTube channel too, Out of Lives Network. Aadil, what are you playing this week? You're doing a first look stream tomorrow.
Yes, I believe I'm playing Deep Sea.
Oh, Dune Sea.
Dune Sea.
Dune Sea.
Yeah.
We will also have Tanks Up one evening this week. It's normally Tuesdays, might be changed this week, dependent on availability. I may stream Wednesday, I don't know yet. I've got a meeting in the morning. Who knows if I'll be back? We'll see. I usually stream on my lunch breaks on a Wednesday. I might have my lunch break in the car this week. Who knows when that's actually going to happen. And then Radari will be back on Friday evening as well, as he was last week and the week before. So you can also go to outoflives.net to look at articles and all those things. Follow us on the socials, which is outoflives.net on Twitter, I believe. And we've got an Out of Lives Network Facebook page too. Join us here on a Monday every week, or go to your podcast service of choice where you can listen to the other episodes of Geek Out weekly. That's it from me. I'm at Nova_47. Aadil, how do people chat to you?
I'm at the Omniarch on all of the things.
Perfect. And that is us for another week. We will catch you hopefully next week. Bye.
Ciao.
www.outoflives.net